Next Kinnos we'll say is Chaf Aleph, page 74 in the small Kinnos. Arze Halavonon. This Kinnos is the Kinnos for the Asor Aruge Malchus. Gedolah HaTorah. Another contributing factor to Churban Bayis Rishon was, as Chazal say, Al Ozvam es Torasi shlo berchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make a bracha on Torah before they learned. They weren't machshiv the Torah. Rabbeinu Yonah says, because they weren't machshiv the Torah, they didn't make a bracha on it. Thinking perhaps the idea is Torah is just words. The halacha is that you don't make a bracha on things that are just words. Bittul chametz you don't make a bracha on because just words according to some. Except if it's Torah shebichsav and you have to say certain words from a sefer or whatever, then it gives chashivas. Stam words, a mitzvah, it's just words, they weren't misakin a bracha. So they looked at Torah Shabbal Peh, just words. They didn't realize those words are the ikar mitzias of the Bria. Those words are that which creates and what's really substantial in the world, and that's what means they weren't machshiv Torah. Whereas the Beis Halevi says, they didn't realize that Talmud Torah was a mitzvah by itself. They thought it was only a hechsher mitzvah. You learn Torah so you know how to do mitzvahs. And you don't make a bracha on a hechsher mitzvah. You only make a bracha where the mitzvah is a completed thing itself. You don't make a bracha on building a sukkah. Make a bracha on yeshiva sukkah. So a mitzvah, it's only a hechsher mitzvah. You don't make a bracha on, they thought you don't make a bracha on Torah because it's only a hechsher mitzvah to do mitzvahs, to do ma'aser mitzvahs. Thinking, that's why the Rambam starts Hilchos Talmud Torah in a very strange way. The Rambam starts Hilchos Talmud Torah not by telling us it's a chiyuv to learn Torah, but Noshim Avodim Iktanim Rapturim Talmud Torah. Instead of like by Hilchos what's it called, Kriya Shema, it's chayiv to lead Kriya Shema every day, and Noshim Iktanim Avodim are potter from Kriya Shema. First tell me there's a chiyuv, then tell me who's potter. Why does the Rambam start off with who's potter from Talmud Torah? He's thinking because the Rambam wants to be koveya what the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is. Don't think the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is only in order to do mitzvahs, because if that would be the case, women also have mitzvahs. They also have to learn their mitzvahs, not midin Talmud Torah, midin the mitzvah. So if the din of Talmud Torah would only be to prepare for mitzvahs, then Noshim and Avodim should also be chayiv. Ktanim should be chayiv too. They also have a mitzvah of chinuch, according to some. But that's not what Torah is. Torah is a separate mitzvah aside from preparing to do other mitzvahs as an intrinsic mitzvah itself of Talmud Torah. And therefore Noshim and Avodim and Ktanim are potter from that intrinsic mitzvah. And that could be what Chazal meant, otherwise very difficult. Gedolah Talmud shemeviyah de Maisa. Learning Talmud Torah is greater than Maisa mitzvahs because Talmud Torah brings lidei Maisa. The obvious question Tosha asked. If the whole purpose of Talmud Torah is to mevi lidei Maisa, then how could it be greater than the Maisa? The Maisa is the tachlis. The Torah is only a hechsher, is only an emtsoi, it's only a means to reach that tachlis. How could the emtsoi be greater than the tachlis? Well, the pshat is Gedolah Talmud. Talmud Torah has an intrinsic mitzvah to itself. In addition to that, it's also maybe lidei Maisa, so it's greater than Maisa, because there's two things to it. And Maisa only has one thing. So Gedolah Talmud is greater than not only is it a mitzvah of Talmud, it's also maybe lidei Maisa. And it's clear that Talmud Torah is not only a mitzvah to know how to do mitzvahs, because there are parshas in the Torah that can never be drosh v'kabel schar, then soru Morah, iranidachas according to some. Can never be. So you can't be learning about it to do it, because you never can do it. There's an intrinsic mitzvah to learn, even if you'll never come to do anything from that learning. It's still a mitzvah to learn. That's the idea that Talmud Torah is Mekayim Kol HaOlam Kulo. Chaim Volozhiner says, that which it says, that if Klal Yisrael were not Mekabel the Torah, the world would have gone to Tohu Vavohu. Is not a one-time thing. But every single second the world exists. If there are people learning Torah, then the world can exist. That's the energy of the world. And if nobody learning Torah, the world would miss its energy of existence. It would stop to exist. There'd be no world. And that's why Chazal say, Gedolah Talmud Torah, Yoser me'atzolas nefashos. Because as many nefashos as you could save is not the whole world. And learning Talmud Torah keeps the whole world going. It's hatzolas ha'olam. And even though the halacha is that you have to stop learning to save a nefesh, it's not because saving nefashos is more important than Talmud Torah. Because that's the Ratzon Hashem. Just like eating matzah is not more important than Talmud Torah. But in Leil Pesach, you have to stop learning to eat matzah. That's Ratzon Hashem. You should do the lesser important thing too. But not because it's not more important. That's why Aaron Kotler says, we list a whole list of Gemilus Chasodim, and we end with Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. So what's Talmud Torah have to do with Gemilus Chasodim? It's apples and oranges. He says, no, the greatest chesed is a person learning Torah. Because all the other chasodim are impossible if there's no world. And people who learn Torah make sure there's a world. That's the greatest chesed, to make sure there's a world. And even though it doesn't look like that, Chafetz Chaim gives a mashal. He said there was once a very wealthy man who wanted to have the most expensive yacht built for him. And he wanted to make sure that everything in that yacht was luxurious. There was nothing plain in that yacht. And he hired an architect and a builder, and he told them, I'm making you a condition. If you put anything in my yacht that's plain, not luxurious, I don't pay you a penny for it. So they built this yacht, and they came to inspect it to see if he's going to pay them. They took him to the staterooms. They were carpeted with plush carpeting, wall-to-wall carpeting. The bathroom fixtures were solid gold, luxurious. Took him to the ballrooms, the dining rooms, everything luxurious. Finally he said, take me down underneath. He took him down underneath the first floor of the boat, underneath the deck, and he sees a room with a regular doorknob. There's smoke coming out of the bottom of the door of the room. He said, I suspect that if in that room there's not luxurious things. I want you to open the door immediately. Sure enough, there was no carpeting on the floor. It was all sooty and black. Regular doorknob. He said, look, I'll do you a favor. I'll give you 24 hours to get this room out of my boat, or I don't pay you a penny. So they took the engine room out of the boat and it all sank. Sometimes that which is the ikr doesn't look as luxurious and impressive as the rest of the boat. But that's the ikr of the boat. Somebody sitting and learning Torah doesn't look as impressive as somebody curing the sick and building bridges and involved in the progress of the world. Looks much more impressive. Somebody sitting by a Gemara doesn't look so impressive, but that's the engine room. That is what keeps the rest of the world going. They once had a meeting to establish a hospital in the area around Radin after World War I. The condition of Yidden was very bad, and a lot of people needed hospitals, and the Goyish hospitals didn't take care of the Yiddish patients properly, so they decided to build a Jewish-run controlled hospital for that whole area around Radin. So the Chafetz Chaim invited all these rich people to make donations to build this hospital. And he wanted to show them how important it was, so he made the meeting in the Beis Medrash in Radin. So all these rich people came, and the Chafetz Chaim got up and explained how important it was to have this hospital. And he wants each person to get up and make a donation of a certain amount of beds. A bed represented a certain donation to the hospital, towards the hospital. So one guy got up and he donated 3 beds, another 5 beds, another 10 beds. Finally came the time for the richest man in Radin to get up and make his donation. Everybody waited with bated breath. How many beds is he going to give? So the guy gets up and he looks and he sees there's an Avreich, poor Avreich, learning in the back of the Beis Medrash. So in order to make a joke, He said, I will donate 100 times the amount of beds that man in the back donates. Everybody laughed, because the guy in the back couldn't donate a pillowcase, let alone a bed. Chafetz Chaim got up, livid, banged on the stender, turns to this rich man. He says, you couldn't give 1,000th of what that young man in the back could give towards this hospital. So they were all shocked. They thought maybe this guy is, unknown, the richest man in the area. Just happened to look like a poor Avrech. Chafetz Chaim says, let me explain. What could you give? 10 beds, 100 beds to take care of the sick people in this area? That man with his Torah can guarantee there won't be any sick people in this area. That's a much bigger contribution than you could ever make with your money. That's what he could do with his Torah. Not only does Torah keep the universe going, it keeps the Olam Cotton going too. It makes a person, it recreates the person. Hamalamed is ben chaveiro Torah kilu yoldo. It's the energy source, it's the Matisyahu of every human being. Every Ben Yisrael who learns Torah is kept going by his Torah. Not only that, it's not only his energy source for this world, but it's his energy source for the next world. Kol mi sheyesh bo or Torah mechayehu. The only way a person gets olam haba is from Torah. Ad kedei kach that the Gemara says, so what about women? They don't have a mitzvah Talmud Torah. How do they get olam haba? Because they support their husbands and children, and they have a schus HaTorah too. It's the only way. In fact, the Shef Shmaisa says that which it says in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Ha'omer ein tchias hamesim min HaTorah zein lo chelik l'olam haba, doesn't mean like Rashi says that a person who says I believe in tchias hamesim but I don't believe the source is from the Torah. So it means something else. It means a person who says I believe in tchias hamesim but its source is not Torah. Torah doesn't create tchias hamesim. You can have tchias hamesim from other things. Is ein lo chelik l'olam haba. Because the only way of getting Tchias HaMesim, Chaye Netzach, Ki Heim Chayeinu V'orech Yomeinu, is only through Torah. Either learning Torah, supporting Torah, somebody has to have a kesher to Torah. Without a kesher to Torah, there's absolutely no Chaye Olam Haba. And somebody who's kofar in that, and thinks that Ein Tchias HaMesim Min HaTorah, that the source of Tchias HaMesim is not Torah, then there's Ein Lo Chelik Olam Haba. And that's why Talmidei Chachamim are marbim shalom ba'olam lo nitna Torah, the Rambam says, Al Pi the Gemara in Yevamis, lo nitna Torah ela lahavi shalom la'olam. The Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam. Shalom means shleimus. The whole shleimus of the world comes from Torah and from Limud HaTorah and from the Talmidei Chacham who learn Torah. And that's what the Gemara says, Adam la'amal yulad. Person was created to toil, to bring out the potential, to actualize the potential in this world. And the Gemara says, Eni Yodea im la'amal malacha, im la'amal sicha. Maybe he was created to work physically. The Gemara says, no, he was created to work with his mouth. And then the Gemara says, maybe just to talk. No, it means Torah. It says the Chafetz Chaim, what it means is the following. People were created in an imperfect world, imperfectly, to perfect themselves and perfect the world around them. And one way you perfect the world is physically. You build and develop the physical world. That's very important. People were created, Asher Bar Elokim Lasos, to perfect and develop the physical world. But that's not the Iker. It's important. It's not the Iker. The Iker is to create and perfect the world with your mouth, because the Rabbanim Shalom created the world with Dibur. So the greatest way of being Mekayim the world is with Dibur. There's all kinds of Dibur. There's Sicha. Sicha can mean communication. People communicate with each other, and that helps them to develop the world. When there's no communication, then it's like Migdal Bavel. There's no progress. There's no development. Sicha can mean Tefillah. People can daven, and in that way build the world. But that's not the Iker either. The Iker is Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is, the world was created from the Torah. B'yistakol kuchabrichu bora alma. That is the world. And therefore the greatest way of being Mekayim and developing the world is through Torah. Torah connects a person to the Rabbanu Shalom. It's Mekayim Avas Hashem. How do you Mekayim v'yohavtas Hashem Elokecha? By v'hoyu hadvorim ha'ela shonochi mitzavcha hayom alavavecha. Limud HaTorah connects a person to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and with that you Mekayim Avas Hashem. It's mechaven das ha'adam l'das ha'makom. Torah gives you a thought process like the Rebbeinu Shalom thinks, and there you can deal with all the problems of life. That's called das Torah, in the way the Rebbeinu Shalom thinks. The more a person learns Torah and conditions his mind to think like the Torah. So that's how he appraises and deals with every situation in life. That's what's called das Torah. And therefore, without Torah, all the mitzvahs can be distorted. It tells the Rosh HaYeshiva of Chaim Mordechai Katz said what it means with Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Before you can actually do a mitzvah and know that you're doing a mitzvah. Kibbur avoim, gemilas chasadim. Chesed can be gili arayis. And avoda can be avodah zora. How do you know that it's emes? You have to use it, Talmud Torah keneged kulam. You have to look at it through the lens of Torah and see if what you're doing is a mitzvah. Talmud Torah keneged kulam. That's why the Chafetz Chaim says that the sorrow shel Esav only fought against Yaakov. It didn't bother him that Avrom had chesed, and it didn't bother him that Yitzchak had avoda, because without Torah, chesed could be arayis, and avoda could be avodah zora. But once you have Torah, then the chesed is chesed, and the avoda is avoda, and the Satan had to fight against Yaakov Avinu, the Amud HaTorah. Borossi Yetzer Hara, Borossi Torah Tavlin. Torah is the tikkun and the tavlin to the Yetzer Hara. Doesn't only eradicate the Yetzer Hara, but it spices it up too. The Shnei Yetzorecha. You can take the Yetzer Hara and make it into good through Torah. And where it can't be made good, you can conquer it and overcome it. And therefore it says, Hamor Shabam Magzil Lemutav Halavai Osi Ozavu. Leave me alone, but keep my Torah. Hamor Shabam Magzil Lemutav. Torah itself will bring you back to Shmiras HaMitzvahs, bring you back to the Rabbanu Shalom. And Torah, Gedolah, Talmud, Shemivili, doesn't just mean that if you don't learn, you don't know what to do. Even if you know what to do. But the more you learn about it, there's an Eno Dome, a person who's Mekayim the mitzvah of Tefillin, has gone through all the sugyas and all the Torah, Rishonim, Achronim, all of the Tamei mitzvah of Tefillin. And somebody who puts on tefillin because he knows that you're supposed to put on tefillin and how to tie it and whatever. The mitzvah is a tremendously different substance, different quality of a mitzvah the more you learn about it. So Gedolah Torah Shemivili Maisa is not just that you're able to do it, but what quality mitzvah depends on how much you learn about it, how much behind that. And in order to make Torah have all of this effect, you have to do it v'amo, u'v'yagio, b'simcha. It's not something you can do in your spare time. Something you can do sipping on a lemonade, sitting in a leisurely pool chair. It's something you have to put omal and yagia and put your entire life into. And then you become a living Sefer Torah. La'asok b'divrei Torah. V'arevna. It should be something that's your simchas achayim. Something that you're willing to invest your entire kochas into. And then a person becomes a Sefer Torah Chai to the point where Chazal said, Kama tipshoi sharinchi, people are foolish. They stand up for a Sefer Torah, they don't stand up for a Talmud Chacham who's a living Sefer Torah. Beyond that, Talmud Torah is a hemshech of Maimed Har Sinai. You want to connect in to Maimed Har Sinai through a Rebbe who connects you to Maimed Har Sinai. That's what Torah is. Torah is that link to the Hisgalus Hashem on Maimed Har Sinai. And that is what Birchas HaTorah is. Lasso, Varevno, Anachnu V'Tzetzoenu, Yodei Shemecho, all these things, Asher Bo Charbonu, are the hallmarks of what Talmud Torah is and how great Talmud Torah is. And therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom was willing to overlook Gili Arayah, Shvichas Dom, and Avodah Zorah, all the things we mentioned. But Lo Viter Al Bittul Torah, because without the Torah, then all these Averas are Shaykh, and there's no hope. When a person has Talmud Torah, it can save him from these. That they say that, I think Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says it. It says that David HaMelech, because he tore Shaul HaMelech's garments, later when he became old, the garments didn't protect him. They didn't warm him up. If you're mezalzel in something, then it's not as chus for you. Because they were mezalzel in Torah, the Torah should have saved them from these Averas. Torah is Megin. But since they were mezalzel, they weren't machshav the Torah. Torah didn't come to their benefit. The Gedolah HaSida is in the schus of Torah. Or Chaim says it a few times, that the Gedolah HaSida is in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu won't let Mashiach come until Klal Yisrael and Machshav Torah. On the other hand, it says that Ikvus of the Mashiach, when Chutzpah is Yazgi, there'll also be a tremendous Chalishas and Nisoyin that to be Machshav Torah. There'll be category of a Talmidei Chachamim, tremendous Gzeirus against Talmidei Chachamim. So maybe there's something bright in all of these Gzeirus. It's a siman of Ikvus of the Mashiach. The Vilna Gaon says that before Mashiach comes, the leaders of Klal Yisrael will be from the Erev Rav. And they'll also make Gzeirus against Talmidei Chachamim. And there'll be tremendous Oni. Can't get clearer to what the Gzeirus of our time are. Gzeirus against Talmidei Chachamim. Gzeirus that put people into terrible, terrible situations of Parnasa problems. And it's all because of Taka, the leaders that are the Erev Rav, as the Gra says. And the Nisoyin is that if with all of that, we're still Machshav Torah. And B'tocha Oni V'adchak, we still learn Torah, and still Machshav. Lamros, all the Gzeirus, then in that schus Taka, Mashiach will come. It's a word from Nosson Eibshitz, the Gemara in Bava Basra. He says that before Mashiach comes, Klal Yisrael will go back to Eretz Yisrael, and they'll think that they found a Yeshua, and really they're on what they thought was an island, but it really was a whale. And they'll start to cook and make whatever on that whale, and the whale's going to turn over and come out, everything's going to be lost. He says what it means is, before Mashiach comes, Klal Yisrael will go back to Eretz Yisrael. He said this in the 1700s. And they'll think that they found the Yeshua from all of the tsaras of Golus, and they'll in the end, what's going to happen is that the whale's going to turn over, and it's going to come out, everything may be almost lost. But if they hold on tight, they don't leave Eretz Yisrael, they don't leave Talmud Torah, even under those circumstances, that will be the schus that Mashiach should be able to come. And Klal Yisrael learned Torah under the most difficult situations, in the concentration camps, in the ghettos. They didn't have government to help to be able to learn. They didn't have Sidur Malay when they got married to be able to learn Torah mitoch rachvus. They learned Torah when they knew learning Torah could mean their demise, where the Nazis would kill them for learning Torah. Not only it wasn't something that was easy to do monetarily, and yet they learned and learned till the last minute, until they were taken away, and they were taken away with the open Gemaras. Yidden learned Daf Yomi not when it was convenient, or they complained because it was a little too late in the evening. They learned Daf Yomi and they were working in forced labor camps by the Nazis. They had to work and produce, otherwise they'd be killed. And while they were working, they were learning Daf Yomi. Baruch Sorotzkin, Zatzal, tells the Rosh HaYeshiva, sitting and learning with his chavrusa, somebody handed him a note. He looked at the note, told his chavrusa, the chavrusa what? He said, no, nothing, and they went back to learning. Later on, the chavrusa found out what that note was. It was a note from the results of tests they had made on him, and the results came back negative, that he was dying of terminal cancer. That was the note. He stopped for a second to read the note and went back to learning as if nothing happened. That's the way to learn the Mesiras Nefesh, and now maybe we're being tested to see if we'll be able to learn the Mesiras Nefesh or not, even when the Erev Rav comes out with Gzeiras and they mask them in the fact that we should toe our portion of Shivyon Benetel, we should carry the responsibility for this country equally, equal sharing responsibility doesn't mean everybody does the same thing. Even in the army, not everybody is on the front lines of a battle. There are people deep under the ground, safe, right, in intelligence units, in radio communication units. People peeling potatoes in the kitchen so the rest of the soldiers can eat. If everybody would be doing the same thing, the army could never exist. So you need all different kinds of tasks to be done. We just believe that the most important task is people sitting and learning Torah to make sure that the soldiers who are fighting are going to be successful. Just one extra task to do. And we share the burden, but it's an assign for us too. When people sit and learn Torah, that they feel taka they're sharing the burden and they're doing this to share the burden of society, or they feel that they're getting off easy. Then they'd rather sit in the base medrash. It's nice to learn, right, than to taka accept responsibility. Do they look at it as responsibility or not? And the difference is how much you learn and how you learn. You're sitting and learning in kollel, you get a kollel check. Right? Are you responsible to come on time like somebody would come to any other job that they have? Or you sleep late, you come in late, you leave early, walk around, have a coffee. Is that sharing responsibility? Even if you hold the Torah, sharing responsibility. So it's an assign for us also to make sure that if we're doing it, we understand that what we say is emes. When we say we are sharing responsibility, we're probably doing the best than anybody else is doing. But we're doing with that feeling of achrayus and feeling of responsibility. It's unfortunate that the greatest one to lose with all these gzeros is not the Avrechim and the Talmidei Chachamim and not the Haredi world, because it'll get along. We got along before without government help. We get along in other countries without government help. And people have been able to be Shomrei Torah mitzvahs under the most dire situation and been able to sit and learn Torah, even threatened with worse things than going to an Israeli jail. If we're treated like the Arab prisoners, it wouldn't be so terrible if they went to Israeli jail. And if we're really concerned about equality, how come they're not drafting the Arabs? Don't they have a responsibility to society here too, Israeli Arabs? They don't bother them. But they're the biggest losers. Because this country has existed for 60 years because at least they had the schus HaTorah. At least they supported Torah. Now if they take that away, who knows what can it be? It says that the Goyim, if they would have known the benefit they got from the Beis HaMikdash, they wouldn't have not only destroyed it, they would have protected it. If the Chilonim understood what schus they have, that their tax money goes towards supporting Torah, that's a kiyum of this Medina, they would not only not make zeros against Talmidei Chacham, they put up more to support Talmud Torah. But they don't understand that. And in the end, they're going to be the biggest losers. Because Torah will continue, and people continue learning Torah, and people continue keeping mitzvahs, but that schus won't accrue to them. Who knows, Rahman al-Islam, what that's going to mean. So Mirz Hashem, if we pass that Nisayin, we understand that Shelo Berchu B'Torah Tchila, because they didn't appreciate what Torah was, and we do appreciate it, Halavai, and we live in a way that shows our appreciation. And Mirz Hashem, that will be another stone in Binyan by Shlishi B'Hei Rav Yonei.